Okay, so I'm going to show you how to manipulate images in your data set. So we're going to use the content aware fill. We're going to do a couple other techniques to basically pad out our data set a little bit more. So in a lot of cases, you're at 750 images and you're like, I need to get to 1,000. Or I want to get 1,500. I really want to have a little bit of a bigger data set than what I've got. So in the case of this work, which is like I'm scraping Instagram's hashtag alcohol inc or whatever, I've gotten a good amount of images, but I want to like pad it out and make it a little bit stronger. So I'm going to show you some techniques. Here's one image we're going to work with. Here's another. This is a case of where like I've got a good texture, but like it's clearly not enough for me to manipulate into 1024 by 1024 square. And lastly, we've got a pretty crazy looking image, but which we're actually going to manipulate quite a lot. So let's get started. So we're going to start with this really simple one. You'll see like, this is pretty common for a lot of art you see on Instagram. Where it's just photographed, but like it didn't clean up the borders. I mean, I wouldn't do this in my own artwork either, but like, for our data set, we want to make sure that we don't have any borders in here because that might leak into our data set. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to use the lasso tool. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to remove the artist's name, even though I don't really like doing that, but just for the data set, it'll be a bit cleaner. So I'll pull up this person's name later and thank them in the comments. We've now made a box around this. We're going to invert our selection so that is come up here to inverse, or you can do Shift Command I. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to click Edit, and we're going to do Content Aware Fill. And you'll see I've got this crazy key command here. I don't actually use that. And in a previous video, I showed you Better Touch tool, which is a fun little tool to use to like just sort of manipulate things like this really easily from your touch bar if you're on a Mac. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to hit that button. You'll see basically all it does is it cleans up those edges. It finds the texture next to it, and it produces an edge that is pretty clean. Like if you look at it, you might be able to see where it repeats, but for this it's fine. Hit OK. So this image is all cleaned up now. Now what's nice about this image is it's rectangular, right? So one thing I might do, and I have a script in my Dataset tools library to do this, is I would come in here and I would actually crop the top section, and then I would crop the bottom section. So that gives you two images for the price of one. Now that's assuming that you want your images to bleed to the sides, like all this other sort of stuff about how you're training your data set. But what's nice here is like with a little bit of this, you get a little extra, so you get two images out of this. Now another thing you could do is you could actually, let's make this square. So let's actually say it's 13, let's make it 1350. Now we've got two edges here. So now we can come in and we can do, once again, we can just do our content aware fill. So we're going to grab that edge, we're going to grab this edge, and we're going to add this here. Hit our content fill aware button. Cool, and now we have yet another edge here. You can play with the details of rotation adaptation a little bit if you want to see sort of what you get out of this. I actually don't like that anymore, so we're going to set this back to none. And we're going to hit this is finished, make sure it looks good. This process does take a little while. So while this is processing, there we go. So if you're not familiar with content aware fill is not a machine learning algorithm. Some people think it is. It's actually just a really, really advanced computer vision algorithm. So it actually goes in, and if I zoom in here a little bit, what it does is it actually finds, it takes the edge of wherever this is, and it finds sort of a region of pixels that sort of matches it. So if you were to actually look at this, it's actually like, you could see where it repeats. So I think it's actually repeating from this and doing some stretching and things. So it's not a machine learning model because it repeats pixels it already sees. So it almost copies and pastes and does it in a really fluid way. If it were a machine learning model, you would actually see something different or brand new, is the hope at least. So anyway, that was a little divergence, but now I've got a square image. So now what I might do is, again, if you're really small, on a really small data set and you're just desperate to get to it, you could do this. So now you've got three images, right? So you've got this image, which is our square image, so you could shrink that down to 1024 by 1024 using a scale method. Or you could go back to, let me go back to my history here. Or I could take two of these, so I could almost get three images for the price of one under this. Now this is actually kind of a good technique to use for StyleGAN. There's been some research into like how StyleGAN works, and a little bit of scale difference between similar images actually helps it train better. And the new augmentations method that I showed last week, or maybe earlier this week, basically does some of this manipulation in the model to help it train better. So there's kind of a good reason to do this. I obviously wouldn't recommend doing this for 1,000 images because that's going to be a lot of handcrafted work you'll have to do. But maybe in one of my datasets courses, I'll show you how to do some of this with like scripting. So you could actually use a machine learning, not machine learning, use a Photoshop JavaScript script to do some of this manipulation by hand and actually see if you can pad out your dataset a little bit more. So this is pretty great. I'm going to save this one, move on to the next. Cool, so now I've got this one. So we can actually do the same thing with our content-aware fill tool. So I'm just going to come here. I'm actually going to grab this shape. And I'm actually just going to, instead of, actually I am going to just do the inverse selection again. So we'll invert that. And now we're going to hit our content-aware fill. Now, this is one of the common problems you see with content-aware fill, which is it does this like stepping, repeating thing, right? This doesn't look very natural. I don't think any of us would want to use this. This tends to happen a lot when you've got a lot of space and it's pulling from a small sample area. So one of the things I usually recommend doing is I recommend playing with the settings over here. I tend to start with like a medium rotation. And already you can see that helps a lot. That sort of like cleans up some of these edges. You'll see you still kind of have repetition and it doesn't look perfectly natural, but to a machine learning model, this might be enough. If we want to play with a little bit more, we could do some things like here's a mirror. So that looks good if you want more texture, but you will see it kind of mirrors the shape. So I wouldn't abuse this one too much because you do get like these sort of mirrored looks, which doesn't always work. And then scale plays with the scaling values of this shape a little bit. You'll see the more you add these things, the longer it takes to sort of get these to work. So I think I'm going to try this. I'm going to turn off mirroring and just keep scale on. Cool, so that looks pretty decent. One thing I'm noticing here is I'm getting a lot of this little line mark in here, right? And so remember that content aware copies areas. So what it's doing is it's copying this little line of thing here, and maybe this one down here as well. So if I want to have a little bit less of that appear in here, one thing I can do is I can actually remove it from our sampling area. So I'm going to turn my brush down to 60. Yours might be in plus, so make sure it's in minus. Now this whole green area over here is what it's sampling from. So I can actually remove this little line here from my sampling region. There you go. So now it's removed this line. Now it's keeping this line in. So I'm just going to remove this one as well. And I might come back in here and try to fiddle with the rotation a little bit more. That looks pretty good, actually. That gives me a little bit more of the texture from up here, which I like. So you could use this in many different ways, right? You could decide to say, like, oh, I don't want to use this line, which is being kind of repeated up here. So let's see if I remove that, if that alters this. Now, again, as you're doing more manipulation with these things, you're going to start to get weirder and weirder things that sort of show up, right? So now I'm getting this repeated texture. So it's like kind of like it's a little bit of, you know, I wouldn't worry too much about these because once they go through a machine learning algorithm and it's like only one image, it's like not going to be that big of a deal. So, you know, don't spend an hour on each one of these images because you'll spend plenty of time building a data set. But it's just a nice way to sort of play with things and get a little bit of a different look and feel, right? So now I've got this. That looks pretty good. So here again, like this is a case of where I might want to try to crop, you know, different parts of this. But in this case, like if I actually look at this, one thing is you can kind of preview what these will look like, right? So if I take a preview of this and I just crop, that actually looks okay. I wouldn't mind that in my data set. So actually I might do a double image of this one. What I was going to look at is just maybe I want just this. That's kind of nice by itself. So maybe I'll just save that out and just use just that shape. All right, so now let's move on to the kind of crazy one here. I could just start by just literally like trying to content aware fill this shape again. Now stuff that's in this perspective generally won't work, and also another thing to know is if you get too close to an edge here, you're going to get kind of some gnarly stuff, just in my experience. So one thing to know is that the way this algorithm works is it looks at the edges that it's trying to tile to. So that means, you know, if you can, like, you want to kind of make sure that you're touching an edge that you actually want to repeat from. So one thing we'll look at in just a minute, let's start with just a basic one here. Oops, and I did that backwards. That's what happens when you don't invert your selection. So let's get out of this one. Let's invert our selection. Do that. Cool. So you'll now see that we have a lot of this tiling. But to be honest, like this looks like a pretty good texture to me. I'll play with this a little bit more. Play with some different rotation. I don't think I want. I tend to find mirroring either works really well or not at all. I have a feeling it might not work for this image. Let's see. Yeah, see, too much of this sort of repetition pattern over here is happening now. Let's turn mirroring off. Let's turn scaling on. That actually looks pretty decent. I don't love this top texture here, so what I might do is I might actually remove this. Let's see what we can get when I take that out. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good. Well, now I'm getting some repeating down here. Where is that coming from? Right here, maybe? Let's see if we take that out. Wow, okay. That changed a lot. Let's undo that. Yeah, so maybe this is good enough. I'm actually going to cancel this and I'm going to show you a little bit of a different thing you want to do. So you'll notice that down here, it picked up this white, but it pretty quickly removed it. So let's just say, in this case, what I really wanted was less of this white. So I'm going to hit cancel here. I'm actually going to just use I'm going to press Option and just remove some corner of this. So again, remember that it's looking at the edges of your selection. So if I remove that, it's going to look at, oops, that was the opposite. Okay, so because my selection is inverted, I actually have to do the opposite and add this to the selection. Whoops, that was not right. Now I did too many zooms backwards, so now my selection is not the right way. Okay, there we go, and I'm going to invert my selection again. And actually, you know what? I'm going to take this white corner out of here as well. Cool. So now if I hit Content Aware Fill again, so see, now it's trying to fill in that area. So you get a little less white. Now there's still some white in here because this pinkish color is still on, is still pretty light. But this is a different way to get a different texture of this. Now you might be thinking, okay, like I've seen you make like 5 different versions of one image. Could I just do this with like all of my work and start with a data set of 5 to 10 images and like reduce it all the way up to 1,000? And like the answer is probably. Like you could. The problem is that because this area isn't changing, you are getting like you'll probably get some overfitting or repetition within this area. So again, do this with like 500 images and like, maybe you don't want to spend 20 minutes per image or however long I've been spending now. But you can play with these quite a lot, especially for abstract data sets like this, and really like manipulate a pretty decent data set out of it. So, I think there's lots of opportunities here. This is just a little bit using Content Aware Fill. One thing, this is sort of a precursor to like, I'm going to be teaching a whole class in September on dataset manipulation. So we'll look at how to scrape stuff. We'll look at more techniques like this. So I'll show you some other techniques for making square images from rectangles and other things, as well as maybe some like scripting opportunities to sort of maybe reduce the time you're spending doing something like this. An image like this, you're going to have to do this one by hand just because it's crazy. But for other images, you might be able to do some other techniques. So we'll take a look at some of that in that class. I have a couple spots left open for that, but most of the videos will go up here, probably in like October or November. So if you're interested, check it out. Anyway, that was it for this sort of video that sort of walked through this process. Drop some questions in the YouTube channel if you have any.